The desert dust still clung to my uniform as I turned onto Maple Street, 12 hours of flights behind me, my duffel bag heavy with exhaustion and relief. Home was supposed to be Emma's laughter, her small arms around my neck, the smell of my wife's cooking drifting through open windows. Instead, I found 14 soldiers in full tactical gear, forming a tight circle in my front yard, their rifles raised and ready, barrels all pointing toward the center. My heart stopped before my truck did. There, in the middle of that ring of weapons, stood my 6-year-old daughter in her yellow sundress, her dark curls catching the afternoon sun, her tiny hands clutching something I couldn't yet see. I was out of the vehicle before the engine died, muscle memory overriding the shock coursing through my veins. 2 soldiers intercepted me at the property line, hands firm on my chest, voices professional but urgent, telling me to stay back. Emma's eyes found mine across that terrible distance, wide and glistening with confusion rather than fear, because she didn't yet understand that those weren't toys pointed at her heart. My voice came out strange, too calm, the tone I'd used in firefights when panic meant death. "I'm her father," I said, showing my military identification with steady hands that betrayed none of the terror clawing up my throat. The team leader approached, his face carved from stone and shadow, a tactical scanner beeping insistently in his gloved hand. "Captain Martinez, your daughter is in possession of a classified military device," he said, each word landing like a hammer blow. "We've been tracking a stolen piece of equipment for 3 weeks, something that went missing from a black site operation. Overseas, and the signal is coming directly from her." His scanner pulsed red as he angled it toward Emma, and my mind began racing backward through weeks of deployment, through confiscated contraband and routine searches. Then it hit me like incoming fire, the memory crystallizing with sickening clarity. The broken phone I'd sent her, the one I'd wiped clean and thought harmless, the gift I'd mailed so she'd have something from Daddy while he was gone. That wasn't a phone at all. Emma held it up toward me now, her small voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Daddy, did I do something wrong with my treasure game?" The team leader's scanner painted Emma's hands in rhythmic crimson. Pulses, each beep a countdown I couldn't stop. Martinez moved closer, his voice dropping to the register reserved for crisis negotiations, the kind where lives hang on syllables. "3 months ago, we lost a device in the Kandahar province during a raid on an arms trafficking cell," he said, his eyes never leaving my daughter. "Not a weapon itself, but something far more valuable to the right buyer, an encrypted navigation module containing GPS coordinates to 17 hidden weapon caches across 4 countries. His jaw tightened as another soldier approached with what looked like a spectral analyzer, its green screen reflecting off his tactical goggles. "We've had intelligence, suggesting it was smuggled out by a detained dealer named Rashid, someone processed through forward operating bases in your sector." My stomach turned to ice as the memory sharpened into devastating focus, pulling me back to a sweltering afternoon outside Camp Phoenix. I'd been rotating through confiscated items before heading home, separating actual contraband from the junk dealers carried as cover, when I found what looked like a water-damaged smartphone in a locked box belonging to Rashid Haddad. The screen was cracked, the device seemingly dead. Just another piece of electronic garbage in a war zone full of broken technology. I'd powered it up out of habit, saw nothing but a black screen, assumed the circuitry was fried beyond function, and thought of Emma asking for a phone like her friends had at school. So I'd wiped it with standard protocol software, dropped it in a padded envelope with a teddy bear, and sent it home with a note saying she could use it for games when we got back, and bought her a data plan. "I didn't know," I whispered, the words ash in my mouth as I watched Martinez's expression shift from professional distance to something harder. He gestured toward Emma, and I saw now what she held, the cracked black rectangle I'd touched with my own hands, believing I was sending love across an ocean instead of danger into my daughter's bedroom. "Yeah, Device was designed to look like consumer electronics, Martinez continued, pulling up images on his tactical tablet. The encryption is military-grade, hidden beneath fake operating system shells, completely invisible to anyone without the right scanner. His voice carried an edge of accusation now, the unspoken question burning between us about how careful I'd actually been with my security protocols. Emma's small voice cut through again, trembling now as the weight of adult fear finally reached her. The treasure game showed me all these special places on maps, and a nice man gave me clues to help me find them, she said, tears beginning to track down her cheeks. I felt my world fracture completely as Martinez's radio crackled to life, a voice reporting multiple vehicles approaching the neighborhood from different directions, moving with tactical precision, and I understood with absolute clarity that we were already out of time. The memory pulled me under like a riptide, dragging me back to that suffocating July afternoon, when the thermometer outside Camp Phoenix had climbed past 115 degrees. I'd been rotating home in 72 hours, processing my final duties in the evidence tent, where confiscated items sat in numbered bins, each one tagged with names of detained persons who'd crossed paths with coalition forces. Rashid Haddad's belongings. Occupied Bin 47, a collection of seemingly mundane objects that had already been cleared by intelligence. Nothing but the ordinary debris of a small-time dealer trying to survive in a war economy. Among cracked sunglasses and a worn leather wallet, I found a metal lockbox, no bigger than a deck of cards, its combination lock already removed by the processing team, and inside it lay what appeared to be a water-damaged smartphone with a shattered screen that caught the tent's fluorescent lighting. I'd held it in my gloved hands, pressing the power button more out of protocol than expectation, watching as absolutely nothing happened. No boot screen, no vibration, no sign of electronic life whatsoever. The device felt hollow, lighter than standard phones, which I attributed to battery corrosion or removal, just another casualty of desert heat and neglect that rendered technology into expensive paperweights. My mind had drifted to Emma's recent video call, her excited chatter about classmates with phones, about feeling left out during recess when other kids played games together, and I'd seen an opportunity to bring home something that felt like a gift, even if it didn't actually work yet. I'd run it through our standard civilian electronics wipe protocol, a software designed to clear personal data from donated devices, watched the program confirm completion on my laptop, then carefully wrapped it in bubble wrap alongside a stuffed camel I'd bought from a local vendor. The care package had felt like redemption for all the missed birthdays, for all the bedtime stories I'd never read, for every morning she'd woken up without me there to make her breakfast. I'd written a note promising we'd get it activated. When I returned stateside, imagining her face lighting up as she unwrapped what she'd think was a real phone, a grown-up device that made her feel included and special. The package had gone out through military postal channels with a dozen others, disappearing into the logistical river that carried pieces of our hearts back to the people we fought to protect, and I'd felt genuine pride in solving her problem from thousands of miles away. Now that pride curdled into poison as I stared at my daughter holding that same device, understanding that my loving gesture had painted a target on her back that criminal networks and military operatives could see with perfect clarity. The nice man giving her clues, the treasure game she'd played with innocent enthusiasm, the coordinates she'd unknowingly accessed, every bit of it traced back to my failure to recognize that some broken things are only pretending to be harmless. The team leader's radio crackled with static, then a voice cut through with clinical precision, reporting 3 vehicles. Approaching from different vectors, no identification, moving with tactical coordination that made his jaw tighten. He turned to me with eyes that had seen too many operations go sideways, his finger tapping the stock of his rifle in a rhythm that matched my own accelerating heartbeat, and I watched him calculate whether I was an asset or a liability in whatever was about to unfold. Emma still stood there, clutching the device, her pink sneakers planted on our driveway like she'd grown roots, completely unaware that men with intentions far darker than arrest warrants were closing the distance to our home. Time compressed into a tunnel where every option led to devastation, where letting these soldiers take my daughter meant watching her disappear into interrogation rooms designed to break adults. But running meant teaching her that home was just another word for temporary, that safety was a lie parents told between deployments. My hand drifted toward my keys, muscle memory from extractions in Kandahar mapping escape. Routes through suburban streets I'd driven 1,000 times without seeing their tactical value. I could have her in the truck before they established a proper perimeter, could use back roads and old training to stay ahead of their response, vanish into the network of veterans who'd learned to exist in America's blind spots after the government forgot them. But Emma's teacher knew her schedule. Her best friend's mother had our phone numbers. Her grandmother called every Sunday evening, and I'd spent 6 years building her a life with roots deep enough to hold her steady when mine kept pulling me away. The device in her hands wasn't just transmitting coordinates to weapons caches. It was broadcasting our position to people who solved problems with fire and mass graves, who wouldn't hesitate to turn our quiet street into a combat zone if it meant protecting their investment. The team leader's radio erupted again, his expression shifting from professional concern to something harder as he processed incoming intelligence about the approaching vehicles. He looked at Emma, then at me, and I saw the calculation behind his eyes change, saw him recognize that protocols written in Pentagon offices meant nothing when a child stood in the crosshairs of men who didn't file after-action reports. His hand moved to his radio, and I knew I had perhaps 30 seconds before his orders crystallized into action that couldn't be reversed, before my daughter became evidence instead of a person, before our lives split into a before and after that no amount of therapy could bridge. My phone felt heavy in my pocket as my thumb found the contact I'd saved years ago with a skull emoji, the emergency protocol that would wake up ghosts, who'd promised to come running if I ever spoke the code phrase we'd sworn was just paranoia, made verbal. I pulled the phone from my pocket with hands steadier than they had any right to be, muscle memory from 1,000 missions overriding the panic that wanted to flood my system, and typed the words that would shatter the peaceful lives of men who'd earned their retirement in blood. Avalanche protocol, my position, bring everything. The message disappeared into encrypted channels that hadn't seen traffic in 4 years, reaching phones buried in desk drawers and storage units, triggering promises made in forward operating bases when we'd all believed we were immortal. The team leader's eyes locked onto my movement, his weapon shifting slightly, reading my body language with the expertise of someone trained to identify threats before they materialized. But I met his gaze with the calm of a man who'd just set forces in motion that would redefine his entire operational parameters. "You're about to have friendlies inbound," I told him, my voice carrying the weight of authority that didn't come from rank, but from certainty. "And I strongly suggest you coordinate with them instead of treating them as hostiles, because the people approaching aren't here for a negotiation." His jaw tightened as his radio confirmed the unknown vehicles had stopped at tactical distances, forming a perimeter, professional spacing that screamed military training. But before he could respond, my phone vibrated with responses that came faster than should have been possible. A thumbs up from Rodriguez, who lived 20 minutes away, a single word rolling from Patterson across town, 15 minutes from Chen, who'd moved here specifically because I'd settled in this neighborhood. The team leader's expression shifted as his communications specialist reported additional movement, more vehicles appearing on their tracking systems, closing on our position with coordination that made his tactical situation deteriorate from controlled to chaotic. "Sir, we've got multiple unknowns. Converging, they're not responding to hails, moving with military precision," the specialist called out, confusion evident in his voice as suburban streets became a chessboard of converging forces. I moved toward Emma slowly, hands visible, every gesture calculated to communicate that I was securing an asset rather than fleeing, and the team, leader's weapon, tracked me with professional neutrality that could explode into violence if I misread the moment. My daughter stays with me. Your perimeter holds against the actual threat, and when my people arrive, you fold them into your defensive positions, I said with the tone of someone issuing an operations order rather than making a request, watching him process the audacity of a civilian dictating terms to a military unit. Emma's eyes found mine across the distance, and I saw the fear there mixing with confusion, the device still clutched in her small hands like a toy that had somehow summoned monsters from the darkness her father had always promised to keep at bay. The first of my old team arrived before the commander could formulate his response. Rodriguez's truck sliding to a stop with tactical precision, his frame emerging already fitted with body armor he'd apparently kept maintained despite years of civilian life, a rifle in his hands that he carried with the casual competence of someone who'd built a career around controlled violence. "What's the situation, boss?" he called out, using the nickname that had followed me out of service, his eyes scanning the scene and reading it instantly. Professional assessment cataloguing threats and assets before the military team could decide if he was either. The team leader's radio exploded with urgent traffic as his overwatch reported the criminal vehicles accelerating toward our position, the waiting game ending as someone made the decision that speed mattered more than stealth, and I watched his face transform from bureaucratic annoyance to combat focus. "All units, defensive posture, prepare for contact," he barked into his radio, then looked at me with grudging respect, born from recognizing that my gamble had just shifted from reckless to strategic. "Your people fold into my command structure, and we're having a long conversation when this is over." More trucks arrived in rapid succession, Patterson and Chen and Williams, and faces I hadn't seen outside of Memorial Day. Barbecues, each one emerging already geared up like they'd been waiting years for this call, transforming my suburban street into a firebase with practiced efficiency that made the military team recalibrate everything they'd assumed about the middle-aged veterans living quiet lives around them. I knelt beside Emma as the defensive positions solidified around us, pulling her into the relative shelter of Rodriguez's truck, while my old team transformed our front yard into overlapping fields of fire, and her small voice cut through the chaos with words that made my blood freeze in ways combat never had. "Daddy, I didn't know the treasure hunt game was real," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she held out the device with trembling hands. "The nice man said I was helping find special presents, and every time I solved a puzzle, he'd give me another clue." My hands took the device with a gentleness that contradicted the violence being prepared around us, the screen showing a colorful interface designed to look like a children's game, complete with cartoon maps and friendly avatars that masked something far more sinister beneath its innocent presentation. The military team leader moved closer, his expression shifting from tactical focus to investigative intensity as he processed what my daughter had just revealed, understanding that we weren't dealing with a simple theft, but an exploitation that had turned a child into an unwitting intelligence asset. "How long has this game been going on, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, despite the rage building in my chest at the realization that someone had weaponized my daughter's innocence, turned her playtime into reconnaissance. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, looking up at me with eyes that still believed her father could fix anything, the trust there more devastating than any enemy fire I'd ever faced. "Since you told me I could use it for games, Daddy, I charged it with my tablet cord, and it had this one app that looked like a fairy tale adventure," Emma explained, her words tumbling out faster as she sensed the importance adults were placing on her confession. The man's name was Apollo, and he said I was a real-life princess, helping find magical items hidden all around the world. The team leader's communications specialist was already working on the device, with equipment pulled from their tactical van. His fingers flying across interfaces as he traced the application's architecture, and his low whistle confirmed what I'd already begun to suspect about the sophistication of this operation. "Sir, this is next-level social engineering. The game interface is reporting her progress to an external server while simultaneously tracking every coordinate. She marks essentially crowdsourcing reconnaissance through child gameplay," he reported, disgust evident in his professional assessment. Rodriguez moved closer, his weapon still oriented outward, but his attention caught by the implications. Understanding that Emma had been mapping the criminal organization's entire weapons network, one innocent puzzle at a time, building an intelligence picture that military analysts would have spent months trying to compile. The device suddenly chimed with a new notification, a cheerful sound grotesquely inappropriate for our situation, and Emma's face lit up with recognition before clouding with uncertainty about whether she should feel happy or scared. "That's Apollo. He's sending another clue," she said hesitantly, looking to me for permission to check a game that had somehow become the center of an armed standoff, her finger hovering over the screen as adults with decades of combat experience held their breath. I nodded to the specialist who positioned his equipment to capture everything, then gave Emma the gentlest smile I could manufacture while my insides churned with protective fury. "Go ahead, baby. Show us what Apollo sent." The message appeared in playful text decorated with stars and magic wands, reading like a fairy tale riddle, but containing coordinate information that made the team leader's face go pale as he recognized the location being referenced, somewhere that clearly held significance beyond what my daughter's game suggested. "The sleeping knight awaits beneath the Iron Mountain, where 7 rivers meet. Brave princess, your quest brings light to his endless darkness," Emma read aloud, her voice taking on the dramatic tone children use when they're proud of their reading skills, completely unaware that she'd just provided intelligence that would redirect an entire military operation. The specialist's equipment showed the message originating from a location that had been flagged in their search parameters, a known criminal stronghold that their surveillance had been unable to penetrate, and I watched the team leader's expression transform as he realized my daughter hadn't just been exploited, but had potentially located something far more valuable than stolen military hardware. The criminal vehicles announced their arrival with the distinctive sound of engines pushed beyond civilian limits, the careful planning dissolving into immediate action as my old team and the military unit shifted from uneasy cooperation to synchronized defense. But my eyes remained locked on that message as pattern recognition from 1,000 intelligence briefings screamed that Apollo wasn't a criminal handler, but someone sending a distress signal through the only channel available. "The sleeping knight," I repeated slowly, my mind racing through operations and casualties and memorial services, landing on a call sign that had been retired with honors after its owner was declared killed in action during a black operation nobody was supposed to remember. Commander Sterling's call sign was Apollo, and he was leading a reconnaissance mission near a facility we codenamed Iron Mountain when his team was ambushed. The team leader's face confirmed my suspicion before his words did. The classified information suddenly relevant enough to override security protocols, understanding that my daughter's innocent gameplay had been hijacked by someone who'd found an impossibly clever way to communicate from inside captivity, turning a child's treasure hunt into a breadcrumb trail leading back to a warrior everyone believed was dead. The first explosion shattered Mrs. Henderson's garden gnomes 3 houses down, the compressed percussion wave rolling through our neighborhood like thunder as the criminal syndicate announced their arrival with military precision rather than subtlety, transforming our quiet suburban street into a combat zone that would haunt property values and neighborhood association meetings for years to come. Rodriguez's team returned controlled bursts toward muzzle flashes, appearing between houses, their training overriding the surreal horror of conducting warfare past swing sets and minivans, while the military unit established a hardened perimeter that funneled the assault into predetermined kill zones. I pulled Emma deeper into the makeshift command post we'd established in our kitchen, her small body pressed against mine as bullets punctured aluminum siding and shattered windows, the device still clutched in her hands, because I needed to understand every communication Apollo had sent through her innocent gameplay. The team leader was coordinating with backup units while simultaneously processing the impossible revelation that Commander Sterling might be alive, his tactical mind compartmentalizing miracle and crisis into actionable intelligence, even as incoming fire forced him to duck behind our granite countertop. Emma's fingers trembled as she navigated through the game's interface, showing me weeks of completed puzzles and collected virtual treasures, each one corresponding to coordinates that the military specialist was frantically cross-referencing against known criminal installations and weapons cache locations scattered across 3 continents. Apollo always said I was special, that I was the only princess brave enough to help him, she whispered against my chest, her voice barely audible over the controlled chaos of the firefight, her innocence somehow surviving even as the world around us descended into violence. The device chimed again, despite the battle raging outside, another message breaking through with timing that felt deliberately chosen, and I watched Emma's face shift from fear to confused hope as she recognized Apollo's distinctive message style appearing on the screen. The new riddle read like something from her bedtime stories, but my trained eye caught the tactical information buried in playful language, coordinates and facility descriptions disguised as fantasy locations, confirmation that Sterling had been conscious and strategic throughout his captivity, waiting for exactly this moment when someone would finally decode his desperate communication. I expanded the message thread against the specialist's urgent gestures, scrolling through months of seemingly innocent exchanges between a captured operative and my unknowing daughter, each cartoon treasure map revealing another piece of the criminal network's infrastructure, intelligence that Sterling had gathered during his impossible captivity. Sir, these coordinates match 17 unsecured sites we've been trying to locate, including the primary stronghold where we believe the syndicate's leadership operates, the specialist reported with growing astonishment, understanding that my daughter had accomplished what satellite surveillance and human intelligence networks had failed to achieve. Emma looked up at me with tear-stained cheeks as automatic weapons fire intensified outside, her small voice cutting through the tactical radio chatter with a question that broke my heart, even as it steeled my resolve. "Daddy, is Apollo in trouble because of my game?" The answer crystallized with painful clarity as another message appeared, this one stripped of playful pretense, raw text that read like a final transmission from someone who knew his window of opportunity was closing. "They know I've been communicating. Extraction window 4 hours maximum. Coordinates attached. Tell Marcus his daughter saved more lives than she'll ever know. Apollo out." Stared at those words while gunfire created a deadly percussion outside, understanding that Sterling had sacrificed his own operational security to warn us about the assault, choosing to expose his covert communication rather than let my family face this threat without context. The team leader read the message over my shoulder, his tactical assessment already forming even as the immediate battle demanded attention, recognizing that we'd moved beyond simple device recovery into something requiring resources and authorization far beyond his current mission parameters. But I was already moving past official channels and proper protocols, my old team instincts overriding civilian caution. knowing that the brother who'd covered my extraction from Kandahar had just used my daughter's innocence to send coordinates for his own impossible rescue. And that debt transcended every regulation ever written in Pentagon offices by people who'd never bled beside their brothers in mountains, whose names remained classified even on our memorial walls. Rodriguez pressed his tactical tablet against the bullet-scarred kitchen table, his calloused fingers pulling up Sterling's service record, while suppressing fire continued in controlled 3-round bursts outside, the screen illuminating faces that hadn't spoken their commander's name aloud since the memorial service 2 years ago, where we'd buried an empty casket with full honors. The official report had listed Commander James Sterling as killed in action during a Black Ops extraction in Yemen, his body reportedly unrecoverable due to hostile territory and immediate tactical withdrawal requirements, closure delivered through bureaucratic language that never quite explained why his locator beacon went dark 3 minutes before exfil arrived. Now that same ghost was communicating through my daughter's treasure hunt game, his words carrying authentication codes that only Sterling would know, tactical references to operations that existed in no official record, but lived in the memories of men who'd executed them under moonless skies. The team leader contacted his superiors through encrypted channels, reporting the impossible development while simultaneously requesting authorization for resources he knew wouldn't arrive in time, his voice carrying the exhausted frustration of a professional, bound by chains of command, even as opportunity evaporated with each passing second. Emma's device chimed again, with coordinates so precise they included elevation data and structural specifications, information that transformed Sterling's captivity from passive imprisonment into active intelligence gathering, months spent documenting every detail of the facility holding him while his captors believed him broken and compliant. The specialist overlaid the coordinates onto satellite imagery, revealing a fortified compound in the mountainous border region between 2 countries whose governments officially denied housing criminal operations on their soil, the kind of location where rescue attempts went to die alongside the operators foolish enough to attempt them. Sterling's message included guard rotation schedules, weapons inventory, and defensive positions, mapped with the obsessive detail of someone who'd had nothing but time and motivation, a gift-wrapped intelligence package that would take conventional units weeks to develop through standard reconnaissance, but the timestamp on his final transmission carried an urgency that bypassed analytical caution, his words stripped to essential truth that resonated in the space between my heartbeat and Emma's frightened breathing pressed against my chest. Rodriguez met my eyes across the tactical display, recognition passing between brothers who'd made impossible decisions in impossible places, understanding that official authorization would arrive approximately never, while Sterling's window of vulnerability closed with mathematical certainty. The rest of my old team monitored their sectors, while simultaneously processing the revelation through expressions that shifted from disbelief to grim determination, the unspoken protocol of operators who'd left too many brothers behind already and refused to add Sterling's name to that particular list of failures. Outside, the military unit pushed the criminal assault back toward predetermined collapse points, their professional competence buying time measured in minutes rather than hours, a tactical gift we couldn't afford to waste on proper channels and approval hierarchies. The team leader watched our silent communication with the resigned awareness of someone witnessing regulations about to be violated for reasons he professionally opposed but personally understood, his hand moving to his radio, even as his eyes told me he'd report our departure exactly 60 seconds. After we cleared the perimeter, the kind of tactical delay that would survive the inevitable inquiry while giving us the head start that might mean the difference between extraction and execution. The decision crystallized with the terrible clarity that defines moments when training overrides survival instinct, when brotherhood transcends the mathematical probability of coming home, when the man who'd carried you bleeding through hostile territory 2 decades ago sends coordinates through your daughter's game, and you understand that some debts can only be repaid by risking everything you've built in the years since you promised your wife you were done with that life. I kissed Emma's forehead while handing her to the team leader, whispering promises I had no tactical basis for making, watching her small hands release the device that had inadvertently become the key to saving the man who'd saved me more times than Pentagon records would ever acknowledge. Rodriguez was already moving toward the door with purpose that needed no verbal confirmation. The rest of our team falling into formation through muscle memory that hadn't faded despite years of suburban domesticity and corporate careers, operators activating beneath the comfortable disguise of middle age and civilian softness. The helicopter insertion happened under conditions that would have been scrubbed by any reasonable operations officer, our civilian contractor pilot, threading the aircraft through mountain passes at altitudes where oxygen debt turned thinking into syrup and rotor wash, carved visible scars through cloud cover that provided our only concealment from radar systems mapping the valleys below. We'd assembled our kit from personal collections maintained in basements and storage units, despite promises to spouses that those days were finished. Weapons cleaned monthly through habits we couldn't break, even when we pretended civilian life had erased the operators we'd been. Night vision equipment outdated by current military standards, but functional enough for men who'd learned their craft before technology became a crutch. Rodriguez checked his rifle with movements that looked like prayer, each press check and magazine seating performed with the reverence of ritual, while Martinez applied face paint with hands that trembled not from fear, but from the adrenaline surge of purpose, after years spent managing spreadsheets. Instead of tactical approaches, the compound materialized through our optics exactly as Sterling's intelligence had promised. Guards positioned with the predictable patterns of mercenaries working contracts rather than causes. Their discipline adequate for deterring local threats, but insufficient against operators who'd built careers on being the nightmare that disrupted other people's security plans. We moved through their outer perimeter like smoke through screens, utilizing approaches Sterling had mapped during months of observation disguised as broken captivity. Each guard position compromised through suppressed fire that dropped targets before their nervous systems could process the geometry of their own deaths. The facility's interior matched his specifications with architectural precision that confirmed he'd spent his imprisonment cataloging every detail rather than surrendering to despair. Doorways and corridors flowing past us through muscle memory built from studying his diagrams during the flight, our formation adapting to obstacles we'd already rehearsed, despite never having physically walked these halls. Sterling's cell was marked exactly where his coordinates had indicated, reinforced door yielding to breaching charges calculated to minimize concussive injury to whoever waited inside, the explosion's percussion wave still hanging in the air when I crossed the threshold and found him shackled to structural supports, his body bearing the topography of systematic abuse, but his eyes carrying the unbroken clarity of someone who'd endured because he'd maintained purpose beyond mere survival. His voice emerged through cracked lips as recognition sparked across features I almost didn't recognize beneath scar. Tissue and malnutrition, words compressed into tactical essentials because we both understood the mathematics of extraction windows closing with each second spent on reunion. Rodriguez worked the shackles with bolt cutters while Martinez established security on our exit route, suppressed gunfire echoing through corridors as the facility's remaining personnel organized response to the intrusion, our advantage evaporating into direct confrontation that would be decided by training and will rather than surprise. Sterling's legs buckled when the restraints released, his body requiring physical support even as his mind remained operationally sharp, feeding us updated intelligence on response protocols, and defensive positions he'd memorized during captivity, transforming himself into a tactical asset even while being carried toward extraction. We fought our way back through corridors that had become contested battle space, each room requiring clearance procedures executed with the desperate precision of operators who'd come to. Far to fail within sight of success, Sterling's weight distributed between Rodriguez and myself while he directed our movement through weaknesses in defenses he'd spent months identifying. The helicopter lifted from the landing zone under direct fire, rounds punching through non-critical sections of airframe, while our pilot maintained control through calculations that balanced weight, damage, and fuel against the mathematical reality of mountains that didn't care about human urgency or brotherhood. Sterling's breathing steadied as we gained altitude and distance, his hand gripping my forearm with strength that shouldn't have existed in someone who'd endured what his body displayed, his eyes holding gratitude too profound for language as dawn light broke across peaks that marked the border between captivity and freedom, between the man he'd been forced to become and the brother we'd refused to leave behind. The debriefing room at the undisclosed military facility felt like a confessional booth constructed from cinder blocks and fluorescent hostility, Sterling sitting across from me with medical monitors still attached to his chest beneath a borrowed uniform that hung loose on his diminished frame. His presence somehow more commanding now than before. Captivity had carved away everything except the essential core of who he'd always been. The intelligence officers had spent 6 hours extracting operational details with clinical precision, mapping the weapons network through information Sterling had collected through methods that transformed suffering into strategic advantage, his captivity becoming an intelligence-gathering operation conducted at personal cost beyond anything official channels would have sanctioned. When the room finally emptied and we sat alone with coffee that tasted like forgiveness, diluted in institutional bitterness, Sterling's voice carried the weight of confession as he explained the impossible calculus that had kept him in that cell long after opportunities for escape had presented themselves. He'd been monitoring their communications, mapping their infrastructure, identifying every node in a network that spanned 3 continents, staying because leaving would have meant allowing the organization to scatter and reconstitute, and he'd been willing to endure months of systematic brutality to ensure that when the takedown came, it would be absolute and final. But his voice fractured when he reached the part about intercepted communications 3 weeks ago. Enemy operators discussing reconnaissance on my home address, plans forming around my daughter as leverage to draw out anyone connected to the device she'd been innocently playing with like a toy. Sterling had broken his operational silence then, abandoning months of careful intelligence gathering to risk everything on a desperate gambit, using her treasure hunt game as a communication channel, feeding coordinates disguised as clues because saving her meant more to him than completing the mission that had already cost him 2 years of his life. His eyes met mine with an intensity that transcended the scars mapping his face when he reminded me about Kandahar, about the compound where I'd violated direct orders to extract him from a collapsing building, carrying him through fire that had melted my gear and burned patterns into skin I still carried. He'd stayed in that cell enduring daily torture because the daughter of the man who'd saved him was in danger, because brotherhood meant the debt transcended time and circumstance, because some obligations ran deeper than orders or operational priorities or self-preservation. The silence that followed held communion beyond language. 2 men who'd built their lives on violence and loyalty, confronting the emotional mathematics of sacrifice and salvation, understanding that we'd each made impossible choices because the alternative meant abandoning the codes that defined us beneath the uniforms and training. Sterling's hand remained steady as he raised his coffee in a toast to missions that ended not with medals but with debts repaid, through suffering voluntarily endured, his smile carrying the peace of someone who'd found purpose in captivity and emerged more whole than when he'd entered. Would you make the same impossible choice to protect someone who once saved you? Subscribe to follow stories where loyalty transcends every boundary and brotherhood knows no limits.